In this video, I'm going to describe how to show repeating data in Jetpack Compose for Android. These repeating rows are editable, which means that we can alter the data in the repeating rows and then persist them. They're also going to be fed via LiveData from Firebase. Let's start with an animation that will show how all of this works together. The Firebase I've created in a previous video, as well as the ViewModel and the start of the activity. So some of this already exists. First of all, the ViewModel can listen to changes on Firebase. So when the application starts up or any other changes are made, it's going to receive these objects from Firebase. And in my case, these objects represent the metadata of photos. Now, the activity can observe on LiveData using observeAsState or observable. And when the activity via Jetpack Compose observes these changes, it's going to look at each object and it's going to create a row inside of essentially a lazy column. So each one of these objects will be represented by a consistent look and feel in a row, but each row is specific to that object. Now the neat thing is, remember, this is editable. So we can change something in these text fields here and then press this button. And you see this change has been represented by the color, kind of maroon, dark red, something like that. And then as soon as we change it and press the button, it will update Firebase. Incidentally, the ViewModel is still listening to Firebase, so the ViewModel will receive those changes and then keep our activity in sync. I did a trial run in a demo app that I have, so I tell you roughly what the finished product looks like. If you see here, we have a single row of data with an image, a text field that you cannot edit, a text field that you can edit, and then a save button and a delete button. I may or may not get to the delete in this video, but we'll get the idea with the save. So you see here it says, I like Honeycrisp apples, and over here in Firebase it says, I like Honeycrisp apples. Now, let me change that to Fuji, and you see nearly instantaneously Firebase updated to I like Fuji apples. So there are a few things I've done in previous videos that I won't cover here. Number one is just connecting to Firebase. Number two is getting live data from Firebase. So in this video, we're just going to focus on making this as a repeating element and then showing multiple photos and being able to edit multiple photos in this LazyColumn, or what we used to call, prior to Jetpack Compose, a recycler view. So look at what we have, because we're going to want to think about how to make this. We need an image here, so that's going to be a column. We need a place here for text, both text that is not editable, like the ID here, and then the date taken down here, and text that is editable. In this case, it's going to be the description. Then we need a third column, which is going to have our buttons, and all of this will be wrapped into a row. Let's get started with that concept first. In my activity, I'm going to start with a composable function. I'm going to call it event list item because I want to expand this concept eventually from photos to events, and events is more of a catch-all. Now you notice that it is passing in a photo. Now what's a photo? Well, that's a DTO that I made earlier, or a data class, that has the URI of the photo, both local and remote, and then a few other attributes like description, date taken, and ID. And so that's the metadata about the photo, but then it does have that link to the photo, both locally and remote, so that we can display the photo. Now remember, this represents each individual row. We will put that all together in a lazy column in a little bit, but I just want to start by focusing on this look and feel that we have here. So we know we're going to need a row. Let's start with that. And inside the row, we're going to need 3 columns. Inside the first column, we're going to show the image. So let's use an async image, which is from a library that I've imported. It's the Coil library, which I found works really well in Compose. I start by setting the URI of the photo to the model property. So I'm using the local URI here because if I have the image stored on the phone, I might as well use it on the phone. I probably should check to make sure that exists first, and if not, then pull it down from the cloud storage that I'm using. That way you can see the image on multiple devices. But for our example, this will work just fine. Description, we should always provide a really good description for accessibility reasons. Now, probably something better than event image, but nonetheless, we'll go with that. Next, we need to constrain the image so that it doesn't get too big. So I'll use a modifier. And I'm going to set the height and the width to 64 dp, which works out about well. That's the same size that you saw on the example that I just showed. Next, let's take a look at the column that has the text that we want to view and the text that we want to edit. We'll use our normal composable functions to create this, ones that we've used outside of a LazyColumn. Same things work here. So I organize imports, and that takes care of our first two text fields, and now I'm working on the outline text field. Note the typography that I used here, H6 font and caption font. Just as we saw over here, this is the H6 and this is the caption font. And now we need to work on this outline text field, which is a bit more involved. First, we need to populate it with the photo description, which is a bit more tricky than it might sound because we need to use the remember function, which means only compute this once and don't recompute it on a recompose. But we also need to recompute the value if the user changes to a different specimen in our case. Because in our case, each specimen has a unique collection of photos. So we have to declare a variable at the top. I'm going to call this InDescription so that we can tell the difference between InDescription and description on the photo object itself. So remember, compute only once at the first recompose and do not recompute again unless this ID changes. That ID will change if we choose a different specimen. Mutable state of means that we're going to pay attention to the state of this when it does change. So we save that all into a variable called InDescription. And now I have a little more information that I need to complete my outline text field because that's what I'm going to set to the value. And by the way, if you don't do the remember part in the mutable state of, you'll find that you can type away in that outline text field and nothing will actually change. So we need that to make it editable. We also want to update it when it does change. We will create an onValueChange lambda. What happens when it changes? Well, whatever the user's typing in is going to be in this IT variable. And you see we're taking that IT variable value and we're assigning it to this InDescription. Now let's give it a label. I start by calling it description, and then I can refactor and extract string resource so that it will be in strings XML, and therefore it will be something that we can internationalize easily. And finally, let's tell it to fill max width. And now we've completed the work for this middle column, let's go ahead and add our Save button in the final column. So when it's clicked, I'm going to have it invoke a Save function, and I'm going to pass the photo to that Save function. Now, which photo? This photo, the individual photo metadata that we're looking at over here. So we're specifically saving that item. The Save function does not yet exist, but that's the nice thing about IDEs is it will help us out. A simple Alt-Enter, create function save, and we can fill in these details in a moment. Let's continue with our button now. I'm going to give it an icon. One nice thing about modern Android is we don't have to draw all the icons ourselves. They give us several that are predefined. A check is usually given as a save indication, so I'm going to use the check. And I simply set that as the value of the image vector attribute. Now, of course, when we use an image, we want to make sure it's accessibility friendly, so let's give it a content description. Probably a good idea to internationalize that save as well, put it into strings XML. I just did that just a few moments ago, so you know how to do it. I won't worry about doing it again, but that's a good idea to do here as well. Finally, let's give it some padding. As I look at this, I see a red line on line 322, and it reminds me of one little change I need to make. OnClicked is expecting a lambda, and we are assigning to it this save function that we made. We actually need to wrap that inside of a lambda. So let's just put curlies on either side, and that will take care of that compilation error. Let's do one other thing while we're here. Give us a little bit of space. And remember that we want to update what the user entered as the description. And remember that we're storing that in a variable called InDescription, and we're associating that variable with our OutlineTextField. So down here in our new save lambda, let's update that on our photo object when the user chooses save. One important note, remember our OutlineTextField set to fit max width. So if I were to leave it like so, it would not leave any room for this column with the buttons. So what I want to do now is give it weight so that we will be able to allocate each of these columns a certain amount of width. Now the way that weight works is it basically makes a fraction out of all this. So sum up these numbers, 2, 4, and 1, and you get 7 as a denominator. Now the first column will take up 2/7 of the width, the next column will take up 4/7, and the final column will take up 1/7 of the width. And once again, you can see that's roughly what we have here. So at this point, we have created this individual row that's going to show each item, and now we have enough information to coordinate it all together in a LazyColumn, which is very similar to the old recycler view. I have a view model that's already listening to Firebase and collecting these photos. Now back to our activity, let's make a new composable function that's going to have our LazyColumn. This works very well with LiveData because we can observe on it, and we know that composable functions can update their user interface when something they observe changes. So let's observe the mutable LiveData from our main view model. And as we see before, we use an observeAsState because event photos is a variable of type mutable LiveData. Now let's start with our LazyColumn. And you see I used padding values to give this a bit of a constraint. Go ahead and import LazyColumn. Inside LazyColumn, we need to provide this items. So we'll say items, and these represent each item that we're going to see in this LazyColumn. So items is a function, and it has a parameter called items, and we're going to put our photos in that parameter called items. And then we have our item content, which means who is going to display this? Well, guess what? It's going to be that event list item that we just created, and we're going to pass in one photo at a time. So we'll say photo equals IT, where IT is the iteration variable for this. Do a little bit of reformatting, and we see it doesn't know exactly what items is, so I'm going to do a manual import. Normally you can resolve these for us, but this one I found we have to do it ourselves, so import androidx.compose.foundation.lazy.items. And the red lines go away. So we have this events composable function now, and we need to invoke it from some location. What I'm going to do is remove this async image here, and just so you know where I am in a function called specimen facts. That's a composable function that is at the very top and essentially calls several other composable functions. So it is designing our entire user interface. So originally I showed a single image at the bottom. Now I want to show this repeating group. So from here, I'm simply going to call events at the very bottom. One small housekeeping note. I have a row that contains my buttons. Starts on 248 and ends on 279, and I realized my last button comes after that row when it should come inside. So I'm simply going to move that up to give us a little better look and feel. And now let's take a look at how it looks. Well, we see the buttons at the bottom are lined up, and at this moment we haven't selected a specimen. Let's go ahead and try that. So notice we chose the Westerland rows, and you note that we do have our image on the left, the image ID up here in the H6, I believe that was, and then the date taken in the caption text, and then we have our description, which we can fill out, and we have the save button. So look and feel wise, I'm happy with how this is right now. Let's wire up the save button. This is actually going to be quite straightforward because we already have a function that we wrote previously to update photos that already exist in the database. It's this update photo database function that exists in our main view model. We simply need to update the access modifier from private to internal so that it can be accessed from outside this class. One other small change I need to make while I'm in here, I realize that it's always creating a new photo object here by doing this add operation. We want to handle an update case as well. So I'm going to rearrange this just a little bit. First, we'll change it to a document from a collection, and we'll update the variable as well to make that a bit more clear. Next, we put an if test here. And if the photo ID is empty, we're simply going to request a new document by invoking document and open and close paren. Otherwise, we'll retrieve the existing document with that ID. So, create new, line 1, update existing, line number 2. Now, in case it is new, I want to handle the photo ID. In other words, updating the photo ID within our local data class. That's going to make it easier to do updates against that ID. I'm going to remove this photo ID part out of the onSuccess listener, and I'm simply going to bump it up here. So in other words, if we create a new document, it's going to assign that document to photo document. And by new document, I mean new document in Firebase. If we create a new one, that unique ID that's assigned by Firebase is going to go here, and we're simply updating that within our local photo data class object, and then we're storing that entire photo data class object back on Firebase. Now, if we're updating existing, no problem. The photo document ID should be the same as the photo ID, so that line effectively won't make a difference. And from there, it's just a matter of invoking this from the save function that we already have in our activity, and that's the one that is getting invoked when we press the check icon that's on our row. Let's try it out. I'm navigating into Firebase. I go to Users, and then the user with which I'm currently logged in, Specimens. Let's go ahead and do the Westerland rows, and let's look at photos, and we have 2 photos. We'll choose this top one, 72243. Now I'll go into the application, and we'll choose the Westerland rows. And we see, sure enough, we have our details for this specimen, and then we have our 2 photos down below. And you can see the ID field up here, NJZVR, so on and so forth, is the same as the ID field that we have here. Let's give it the description, a beautiful bloomer. As I click the checkbox here in just a moment, watch closely at this description in Firebase. And you notice that it updates almost instantaneously. So what's really neat about this, and by the way, I've added a few more photos with the video pause so that you can see that this scrolls. So what's neat about this is you can see this repeating list of data, and it's all essentially self-contained. We have our description here, and we have our save button here, and that's particular to this specific photo, where the description here and the save button here is particular to this specific photo. And that becomes very obvious when we look at this event list item composable, where this single row represents everything that we're seeing on that dropdown. And the onClick, which uses the description, which is local to that row, and the photo that is local to that row, it's all coordinated within this one composable. So in this video, I've shown how to show repeating data in Jetpack Compose with LiveData, which is fed from Firebase. As always, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.